to 1 in every 3 species of marine animals. Coral ecosystems are the rainforests of the sea, but 2/3 of corals worldwide have already disappeared. And with global warming expected to likely exceed 1.5 degrees centigrade within the decade, we risk losing those that remain in the next 10 years. Even if we meet the most ambitious climate mitigation targets, reducing greenhouse emissions and improving local marine conservation measures can help, but are not enough. The G20 has agreed to establish a global coral research and development accelerator platform to bring together the best scientific minds to scale up next-generation science and technology solutions before it's too late. We ask that you join us for our oceans, to protect the economies and societies that depend on corals, and to help secure a future for them.
We're ready to go? Good morning, everybody. My name is Carol Pua. I'm from WWF, and I lead the Coral Reef Rescue Initiative, and I'll be a moderator today. It is a joint event today between ICRI, CORDAP, the Global Fund for Coral Reefs, WWF, and the Coral Reef Rescue Initiative. Co-moderating with me today is Fabienne Cousteau, and I'll just get Fabienne to say a few words.
Good morning, everyone. It's a pleasure to be amongst all of you. Thank you for letting me co-moderate. I look forward to insights and solutions, and here you go.
Thank you. So today we're going to have the pleasure of hearing from very distinguished global experts on what is the situation with regards to coral reefs and climate change. And we have a fantastic panel lined up for you today and some wonderful partners in the room to share the information and also think about where do we go with the information that's been provided and how do we work together on this global challenge. So to kick us off today, I'd just like you to welcome the UN Secretary General Special Envoy for the Ocean, Ambassador Peter Thompson, who actually encouraged us to organize this event, just to keep front of mind that this is a huge global challenge that will require all of us working together. If you put your hands together, please. Thank you, sir.
Thanks very much, Carol, and sorry we're starting late. It's my fault. I've actually got my Prime Minister from Fiji coming in at the event right next door here, and I'm trying to make sure that he does come in here as well. But unlike this room, which is packed, that room is pretty much empty, so I've got to be careful not to steal it. So anyway, I've got people that hopefully will bring him through to hear from us, because as you know, coral is absolutely existential for Fiji. As some of you may know, I come from Fiji. All of our islands are surrounded by coral reefs. It's kind of unimaginable to us that there would be a world without coral reefs. I mean, it's kind of reason to exist. You know, it's like saying there are going to be no trees. So the sad fact is, and you know, we've had this now from the best of our scientists, that coral reefs, majority of them will be gone this century. If we stay on the current track. Even on the current track, they're in great jeopardy. So the current track is going to somewhere between 2 and 3 degrees before the end of this century, global warming. That's a world of fire and plague. It's a world of droughts, driving people from continents, whole continents. It's a world of wars. And that's what we're bequeathing our grandchildren. And those of you that have grandchildren like me know that's the reason to get up in the morning and do things, to try and rectify. On Sunday I was on the beach in Casavelos here with the Secretary General Guterres for the Youth Forum. And to the hundreds of youth representatives present and the tens of thousands beaming in from around the world, Mr. Guterres said, on behalf of my generation, remember this is the Secretary General of the United Nations, arguably the leader of humanity, on behalf of my generation, I want to deeply, deeply, deeply apologize for what our generation has done to this planet and what we are bequeathing to you in your lives, in your lifetimes. So that's the situation we're in. You know, it's been described as a red alert for humanity. And for people like us in Fiji, seeing the coral reefs dying, it's like, yeah, we feel that almost unbelievable thing is going to happen. But the good news for us is we do have a resilient reef up in the north of Fiji, one of the world's biggest, actually. And there are others, of course, around the world which are being identified by WWF and others as reefs that we've got to protect, do what is necessary to help them survive. Because, you know, we're up against the ocean acidification, up against the global warming, but there's a lot that we can do locally to help them survive, keep them resilient. And also those resilient reefs may in fact be the means by which we can get things back, who knows, in 100 years or 1,000 years. You know, as long as we've got some healthy reefs, the day may come when we have done sufficiently good things on this planet that we can start bringing coral reefs back to what they once were. And of course that's mainly about the transition to renewable energy. And if there's anybody still driving a car that emits greenhouse gas emissions, please stop. I won't make my list because it would sound too much like preaching, but my wife and I, when we were living in New York, been big beef eaters all our lives. One day we looked at a photograph of our grandchildren and the latest report on what beef was doing to the Amazon and doing to the planet. We said, hey, which do we love more? So we gave up our hamburgers that day and never touched beef or veal since. It makes travel to Italy rather difficult. Everything seems to be veal on the menu. So look, we've got world's best here in this room with us on this subject, and it's not for me to take up too much of time, other than to say, you know, we have this red alert situation. So listen to what's said today, and let's go away and put it all into action. I think as President Kenyatta said yesterday, this week is, when you get down to it, really about finance. You know, obviously we're supposed to be finding science-based solutions for the ocean's problems, and that goes right across the gamut. Perhaps led as a poster child, unfortunately, by coral. But when we get those solutions identified, and those solutions are coming through quite clearly, at the end of the day, you need money to make them happen in most cases. Of course you need political will, of course you need people on the beach picking up the plastic and going out and replanting. You need all that, but you also need the finance to make it all happen. And we're on our way to Sharm el-Sheikh in November to make sure that $100 billion comes across, but in the meantime, you know, all of us have got a bit of money jingling in our pockets that we can put to the right thing. And why would we be doing that rather than buying another bottle of Chardonnay or taking the next holiday on the beach? Because it's intergenerational justice. It's just wrong that we should be enjoying ourselves when our grandchildren are not going to be able to. So what you're doing here is really important in this room. We're going to capture the findings of this. I was at a coral breakfast here yesterday. All the good ideas on coral, really important to the outcomes of this conference. And thank you all for being here.
Thank you very much, sir. So I'll call upon our first speaker. If we could get the slide deck ready, please. Professor Ofu Goldberg from the University of Queensland, from the Center of Coral Reef Studies, and who's also a chief scientist for the Coral Reef Rescue Initiative. Please don't.
Right, you can hear me. Well, let me first thank Ambassador Thompson for those wise words, and to also recognise his presence and that of the Prime Minister of Fiji, eventually. And also like to thank all of you who are a very distinguished crowd here that have taken time out from your schedules to be here today. Well, I'm here really just to talk about the latest science in terms of coral reefs and climate change. And while I would have hoped that it had got a lot better, it's obviously very dire at the moment. We're seeing things that we couldn't have imagined 10 years ago happen on reefs today. And I just want to go through these points. I mean, the first one, just to say, this is worth the fight. It's 0.1% of the bottom of the ocean. It provides enormous amounts of benefits to humans and ecosystems and so on. So it's something worth fighting for. And if only for the 500 million people or so who depend on coral reefs heavily for food, income and coastal protection. There's no question this is a really, really vital planetary resource. Now, you'd hope that if that were the case, then we'd be looking after them and we wouldn't have reefs in decline. But what has happened since over the last decade has really been quite shocking. We already knew at the beginning of this last decade that 50% of corals and coral reefs had disappeared over the previous 30 years. And that's just been going on. But I was personally shocked when this very rigorous and careful report from the the Global Coral Reef Monitoring Network came out and said that it's increasing in speed and that we've lost 14% of coral reefs since 2009. And the reasons are both local and global, but global has been growing in significance. And I take you to this story here, which is the Great Barrier Reef in 2016, 2017 and 2020, when we had a mass coral bleaching event on par with the only one we'd ever had, which was in 1998, occur in a 5-year period. And just to give you an idea and make sure that Marco knows the significance of this slide, the Great Barrier Reef is the size of Italy. And half of it in these cases was more than bleached. And then we had these mortality rates. And so when you look at these changes on reefs like this one, this is just an image coming from 2017 from the Centre for Excellence. You can see there's a tiny tweaking of temperature and you have corals essentially falling apart and dying on huge scales. And so this really is something that we are failing. If we were to get a grade for our work here, we're failing. Number of reefs saved, a lot less than we wanted. When you go to the IPCC, and I've been involved with this process for about 15 years, they do the best at sort of getting a consensus, essentially, of what's going on. It comes as a surprise to a lot of people when they're told that if we achieve the Paris objectives, we still lose 70 to 90% of the coral reefs we have today. And that if we were to let things go to 2 degrees, we'd be seeing 99. And of course, that's pretty devastating and might actually lead you to sort of thinking that, well, it's too late, it's time to forgive. And even if we could, which we can't because we depend on reefs really heavily for our own existence, this idea is that it's actually more about the 10% saved in this case as opposed to the 90% lost. We've been really focusing on that 90%, and that 10% is where I think the action is. And if we can focus our resources and strategies, then I think we have a good opportunity of getting to the point where we've managed the emissions and we've now got coral reefs starting to grow back as the climate stabilises. Now, you may think I've been drinking too much cordial, but I mean, that still is in reach. And I think we have to go for it because there is no other option with respect to coral reefs. Refugia, that 10% is not all in an even spread across the planet. It's actually in isolated circumstances. And Serge will see that paper that Serge, where are you? There he is. They've identified the idea that there's quite significant delays in some parts of the ocean getting as hot as the rest of the ocean, if you like. So they're acting as thermal refugia. And so this then becomes an opportunity to perhaps detect where they are and then provide protection, reduce the local stresses that are causing them to teeter on the edge. And so to do this, we had the 50 Reefs Project, which brought a whole bunch of scientists together, and David Abura's here, and various other. You had a good time, wasn't it? It's hard to go to Hawaii and not enjoy the place. But in this case, it was a mission to find out what variables, particularly from satellites, Jennifer Costa's here, that you could use to sort of get a measure of climate exposure. So once you know that that's going to be low, then that's a place that you might then protect. And that then led to this fascinating diagram where 18 different metrics of exposure to climate change were combined and weighted, and then the simulations run. And then you get a map like this, which shows the least exposed to climate change regions, the blue bits, versus the red bits, which are where climate is moving fast and perhaps isn't a good place to sort of work. So you look at that, and it actually makes sense, because you've got the heart of Indonesia being fairly stable and the southern Great Barrier Reef. Now, both of those places, when you visit them, have maintained quite healthy coral populations, not like you see in the northern part of Japan and so on. So there's really something in this, and this then led to the initiative led by Carol Poor and WWF to sort of say, well, where are these reefs and how do we then protect them at various scales? So you can protect them at the sort of political scale, you can protect them at the sort of village scale. And once you understood where those places are, then to put in place the sort of measures you have to save these reefs from local stresses, so all the pollution. It essentially targets the efficiency of your interventions. And so this was launched in 2020, and various people around the room here have contributed to this. And at the end of the day, we've ended up with a sort of a manifesto, I think you'd call it, and that is that if we're to have impact and scale like we haven't had so far, then we really need to invest in that outer ring to ensure that we do have healthy land and seascapes, that we have resilient communities, that we have sustainable blue economies, that we have networked solutions, and that we catalyse the sort of change we need to have. And so I'll finish with that here. Thanks.
Thanks, Ove. Following Ove, I've got Dr. David Abura from Cordio, East Africa, to present an additional narrative to what Ove just presented as well and what's happening in coastal East Africa.
Okay, thank you very much, Carol. Good morning to all. It's a real honor to be here speaking to you, so thank you for this opportunity. It's always tough to follow Ove in a presentation. He's taken most of my messages. No, that's not true. But yes, so my basis of work as a coral reef scientist, some of you know, working in East Africa and the Western Indian Ocean, focused on coral reefs, an ecosystem we love so much. Ove has gone into how valuable they are at the beginning. I don't think we really need to impress that on anyone in the room here. I think you all understand how magnificent reefs are for their own sake and also for people. And I think the Coral Reef Rescue Initiative has done a great job of pulling together some of the key information that really tells us how important these systems are and why we should work on them. Now, the work that I've been doing since actually the Coral Reef Rescue or the 50 Reefs Project, in a way has been coming to this side of how do we deal with this challenge. And I have a very boring presentation. This is my one slide, and there'll be some text coming up. Because I think it's really important to, as we move out from the space of where we work in the coral reef world, to really see how the work that we do impacts on other sectors, how important it is, how other sectors impact on us, and how we leverage the strengths from other sectors as well, in terms of trying to achieve what we would like to achieve. And the real question is how to transform to a reef-positive future. I think Ove has explained really well the importance of that 10%. And I think it's really important, as in these sessions now is to have that realism, as expressed by Ambassador Thompson. We really do know that we're getting to a state of having perhaps 10% of reefs remaining, perhaps less than that. The science will tell us over time what retention or recovery is possible. But I have a very strong interest, and we must absolutely do what we can in those 10 or 5% remaining as things move forward into the future. But you know, I'm a Kenyan scientist and working on African conditions, and of course I'm very conscious of course what happens in that 10% is very affected by what still is happening in that other 90%, and of course all those people that depend on reefs in those places will still be dependent on those emerging ecosystems in those other places. Not to distract from our focus, but to really understand how we contextualize our work across space. The critical thing, as expressed by Ove, is this addressing drivers, the direct and indirect drivers, so what are really causing this problem. And unless we dial back on that accelerator of growth, none of the restoration actions or none of the protection actions we can put in place will be as effective as they could be unless we dial that back. And I think both the IPBES, which I'm working with a lot now, is very much involved in the global assessment a few years ago, and in thinking about where to move to and trying to generate action in coral reefs where they matter and for the people, I've taken on board a lot more of IPBES responsibilities. There's a nexus assessment coming up now in a few years, looking at the nexus between climate, biodiversity, health, water, and food for people, and of course everything else with the SDGs. And I realize that that's where I want to be in 2 or 3 years in terms of being a publishing scientist and trying to influence action out there in the world at the top levels. So I took on board to co-chair this assessment because I think in terms of the leverage of what I can contribute as a coral reef scientist based in Africa with my background, this is where I can really contribute to moving that dial, pulling back on that accelerator. So to really help make sure that the 10% survives and that the other 90% is in as good shape as it can be. And then the other critical important there, which I think is very much on everybody's agenda in the room as well, and we're very conscious of that, and all our programs are moving towards this, is the equity dimensions. It's, you know, for whom are we doing this work, by whom as well, and the sorts of decision-making processes that really connect the local action on a reef to the global priorities and the global capabilities and resources that we can bring to bear. So for that, I've really been working with the Earth Commission. It's part of the Global Commons Alliance, which some of you are very aware of, and partners in that, and really understanding how do we move towards a safe and just world. So it's not just about biodiversity being intact, but where is it and for whom and who benefits. It's about reversing, repairing damage, and dialing back on this accelerator is really about over-extraction, over-consumption over the last 50 years in the global system that we have put in place and that we need to transform. So that's a lot about internalizing these externalities, the CO2 out there, the overconsumption, the pollution, and so on, and understanding how we reinvest the wealth that we accumulate, we transform from nature into manufactured capital in amazing places. You know, a lot of that needs to be reinvested, a lot of the finance that we're trying to identify, and I think the finance people in the room here really understand that as well. We can have the thin end of the wedge as the finance we can generate in programs and initiatives like this, but we need to get all companies, all corporations to really be reinvesting a major part of what they earn from nature in coral reef places, but back into sustaining those places. So I think I'll finish with that and moving towards the people side of it. Thank you.
Thank you so much, David. I love hearing David talk about what's happening in coastal East Africa and some of the great work that they're doing in Cordio as well. We'll have a Q&A session after Jennifer's presentation as well. So so Carlos first, sorry. I'm so sorry, Jennifer. Next up, we have Professor Carlos Duarte. Oh no, Jennifer is first. Sorry, Jennifer. Jeez, Dr. Jennifer Koss from NOAA, co-chair for ICRI. Thank you, Jennifer. Trust the slides always, eh?
Thank you very much for having me speak. I'm going to be wearing a couple of different hats here, and it's a true pleasure to be here and to address such a august body of folks here. Now that Ove and David have set the scene and talked about what's happening, what are we going to do about it? How are we going to go about doing these important things to make sure that corals persist into the future? I think Ove alluded to it. Corals are sort of that too big to fail. We really can't afford to lose them. It's not an option. So what are the things that we're going to pull out of our collective bag of tricks to make sure that we keep corals going? I will advance here into this next slide. The United States took over the chairmanship of the International Coral Reef Initiative, I think last year. And in that year, we've written a new plan of action. And you can see broadly these themes. These are the type of things that we're going to be doing through the general membership of ICRI, along with some exciting partners that I'll get to at the end of this slide. So theme 1 there is really about strengthening policies, building capacity for resilience-based management. Resilience-based management takes into account what's happening today and what will happen tomorrow. You can't just manage for today. You have to manage for what your conditions are going to be in the future. And really increasing the capacity for restoration of resilient species of corals. We've talked a lot about resilience today already. The second theme is really to take the Global Coral Reef Monitoring Network to the next step. The report that Ove showed, the common indicator that all of our nodes have is that we could talk about coral cover. There's so many other indicators of health and resilience and also decline with coral reefs. We need to be able to talk more about the other stressors and the other things that are going on reefs to better be able to manage them. The third theme is about integrating planning. In a lot of areas, folks have plans for disasters, plans for restoration, plans for their watershed management. We're trying to integrate those plans into holistic things so that you're thinking about the reef as an ecosystem, but as it also relates to land, and really providing more integrated planning tools for people so as not to overwhelm them with a myriad of different plans. And then the last theme is really about connecting with youth and other audiences, non-traditional audiences in some cases, and then also connecting with indigenous peoples and incorporating the knowledge that they have into management plans. And in order to facilitate all of that, we're going to need more resources. So I'm excited that ICRI has a couple of new members, and that would be CORDAP, which Carlos will talk about, really exciting funding program to really increase technology and ability to do restoration and other management actions at scale, and then the Global Coral Reef Fund, which you'll hear about a lot over the coming days. Just a small example from NOAA in terms of how do you do all these things? How do you incorporate resilience into planning? You need good data and things like ecological forecasts. NOAA's Coral Reef Watch program is an ecological forecasting tool where we've been able to create a product that forecasts out to 4 months the likelihood of a coral reef bleaching, and then the closer you get to that bleaching event, how severe might that event be. And the importance there is not just to say, my reef might bleach, it's what am I going to do about it? The Coral Reef Watch product doesn't tell you conclusively that your reef is going to bleach. It's a little bit too broad in its resolution to do that. Doesn't take into account local resilience, refugia places, and also doesn't take into account maybe you will have a very beneficial tsunami, or not a tsunami, a hurricane or typhoon that comes through that cools the waters and actually prevents your bleaching. But it is definitely a great diagnostic tool to figure out, do I need to take further management action during a period of high stress? This was meant to be a looped, and I think we probably had to go with the static slide, but it was just to show you that the Coral Reef Watch product maps heat stress as it moves around the globe, and it's rather fascinating to watch it. So hopefully you can get on the website and take a look at it just to see how heat stress moves around each ocean basin and strengthens at different times of the year. So bottom line for managers is my reef going to bleach? What can I do about it? During periods of high stress, we've seen different countries use the information in different ways. We know that in Thailand, for instance, when high stress events are likely to happen, they change their management of their marine parks. They'll allow less visitorship so that there's less human impact. And then the last slide here, sorry, is what can we do to improve tools like that when you have best available science. We would really like to take our Coral Reef Watch program to be also a predictive tool for where you'll find resilient reefs based on what we know about chronic bleaching patterns. And then once you've done that, how do you best preserve and sustain those reefs? So with that, I'm going to end, and hopefully on a high note, I really do think not only is this the time that we have to do things, I think we're capable of actually turning the ship around.
Thank you, Jennifer. Next up, we have Professor Carlos Duarte from King Abdullah University, and was also leading the work at CORDAP. Thank you.
Thank you, Ayan. I would like to start by thanking Ambassador Peter Thompson for bringing us all together here. I think there's, in this last stand for coral reefs, there are many things that are important. One of them is that we are all together in this room. ICRI, WWF, the Global Fund for Coral Reefs, CORDAP, we are working together. We are not doing our own independent show. We are acting together to secure a future for coral reefs. And I very much sympathize with Ambassador Thompson's comment that this is a matter of justice, and David has brought this point strongly to the table, and it's a matter of intergenerational justice. So we cannot accept that our children and grandchildren grow in an ocean devoid and depleted of coral reefs. So we often say that coral reefs are the rainforests of the ocean. And as coral reefs bleach with climate change, then rainforests are increasingly vulnerable to wildfires. And we're losing forests in Australia, in the Amazonia, in California, in Russia, to wildfires, right? So both bleaching and wildfires are becoming more prevalent and likely with climate change. When forests burn, we go and plant them back. We don't grieve and move on. We don't triage them. We plant them all back because we are very sure that our livelihoods depend on the forest. When the corals reef bleach, we grieve, accept the loss, and move on. This is not acceptable. We need to raise our ambition to the same ambition that we have for the rainforest of the ocean, that we have for the rainforest of land. This is a simple message. It's a simplified message, if you wish, but it's one that we need to face. Why is it that we have an ambition to plant 1 trillion trees on land, and yet the most ambition we are able to come up for the ocean is to plant 5 million corals? There's a difference of 10 to the 9 in the level of ambition. What we are planning to plant on land is 300 times the total existing area of coral reefs. Are we going to accept that poor ambition? What should we do? Obviously, it's harder to restore coral reefs than to restore forests. Everybody can engage in tree planting, but not everybody can go underwater, despite Fabian's grandfather's dream that everybody will be underwater to be able to plant coral reefs. But can we not engage the global population with this endeavor as we engage them with the Trillion Tree Initiative? Can we not raise the boundaries of the possible? In fact, I was born in the 1960s, 1960 actually in Lisbon. This is my hometown. And then in 1960s, this generation said that we need to be realistic. But to be realistic is not to accept that we're going to lose 90% of the ocean. In the 1960s, we said, be realistic, demand the impossible. So we need to demand the impossible because we have to. And the impossible, if we demand the impossible, we need to just redefine what are the boundaries of the possible. And refining the boundaries of the possible requires science and technology. So we can do that, and we have redefined the boundaries of the possible. 2 years ago, a pandemic affected us all, COVID, and claimed many lives, and we did not triage the lives and accepted the losses. Nobody thought that a vaccine was possible within 1 year, but the vaccine was delivered within 1 year. Some people think that that was a miracle of science, but in fact, scientists that developed the vaccine, like Kathleen Carioco, started working on mRNA vaccines 20 years ago. Nobody trusted that her research, her ideas were going anywhere, but this vaccine has saved many lives. So we need to redefine the boundaries of the possible. We need to raise the ambition. And the only way to do that is through science and technology, so we push the boundaries of what is possible. So it's not by triaging corals. I think we have already identified 10% of the world corals are resilient, but we cannot really give up on the other 90%. If that is the best that science can do today, that science is not good enough, and we need to redefine what science can do. And we have to do that through a global effort, and we have to do that through a global effort that brings together the best minds, not necessarily coral reef biologists, but possibly architects, probably engineers, probably others. We are now delivering trees by drones. Can we not plant corals with drones? Is that impossible, right? So can we not engage the best science and the best minds in the world with this endeavor, which is fundamental for generations to come? So this is my premise. This is my very simple and simplified statement. And my last stand for coral reefs is that we should raise the ambition, and we should push the boundaries of what is possible, and we need to do that together. Yesterday I was having a conversation about the concept of, somebody was telling me about reefs worth saving, and that concept actually troubled me, because I think that every reef is worth saving. So I do not accept that I can go across to Sudan, for instance, and tell somebody, a fisherman whose livelihood depends on the reefs, that your reefs are not worth saving. And we are not going to do anything to save your reefs. Yes, of course, as investors, you are interested in the safety of your investment, but the way we de-risk your investment is by improving science and technology so that we can improve the outcomes of your investment. And make sure that every reef is worth saving, and every reef will be invested upon, because we will have the tools to make your investment worthwhile there. So this is what we do at CORDAP, with the contribution of all organizations in the room. They are the ones that deliver the restoration and the conservation on the ground, but we have a mission to advance the boundaries of the possible in terms of what can we do to secure a future for the 90% of the coral reefs that we are now, with current science and technology, not able to secure a future for. So we want to avoid the loss of coral reefs, and we want to do that by inviting everyone to engage in an effort to develop the next best science and technology that can push the boundaries of the possible and find a future for the 90% of reefs that currently we believe cannot be saved, and even expand coral reef area beyond the current state. We need to have 1 trillion coral reefs planted, as well as we have 1 trillion trees planted. And when the Trillion Tree Initiative came up, everybody said that it was impossible. But just raising the ambition was able to identify what are the bottlenecks, what are the critical elements that we need to overcome, and a lot of minds started working on how do we overcome those challenges. So we really need to raise the ambition, and we need to do that by science and technology, and then make that science and technology openly available, make that equitable. So in CORDAP, we will have a mandate for all projects to have partners from middle and low income nations at the same level as developing nations. So we invite them to participate in the process as well, and use their talent and ingenuity as well to deliver the solutions. So we have a target of our program is scaled to be about 30 million per year. We are now at 1/3 of that. We are working with the Global Fund for Coral Reefs and others, and on Thursday we will announce a partnership with the Global Fund for Coral Reefs to fundraise together and reach the target of our program, because we have a decade to solve this problem, and we will not accept that we're going to lose any single coral reef in the world. Thank you.
Sorry. Thank you very much. Should we go on to questions? I was thrown into this role last minute. Thanks, Carol. I have a few questions on this first panel. let's start with Professor Duarte, actually. You mentioned my grandfather. My grandfather in 1997, the last year he was around, had mentioned that he could not bring my father to places he had seen when he was young because they didn't exist anymore. And similarly, my father said the same thing to me. And unfortunately, I'm saying the same thing to my daughter, who's 10 years old. Yet, morally, and you touched on this very deeply, I have a very, really hard time accepting reality, accepting the what people say is realistic. And it goes into a question of what's realistic versus what we can hope for. And anyone who's in the science world tends to dismiss hope. But I will argue that hope is unrealistic. But being realistic is the enemy of accomplishing the impossible. And we've seen the impossible happen if we put our minds and our resources together. But how does one convince an esteemed panel here, an esteemed group such as this, a group of experts in the political arena, in the private sector, in the nonprofit sector, in the university sector, to work together so that we can accomplish the impossible? It's a big question, but it's one that we have to tackle if we're going to go beyond the 10% of the coral reefs.
Thank you. So maybe drawing on the semantics of hope and so on, I think optimism is a kind of a life attitude that hopes that everything will be fine without anything. Hopes, in contrast, it's a verb that is spelled with the sleeves roll up. So hope comes with work and comes with effort. So I'm actually hopeful, but delivering my hope will require a lot of effort and will require a lot of hard work and pushing the boundaries of the possible. So 2 years ago, if we were in a forum discussing the future of COVID, nobody will be thinking that a vaccine will be delivered in 1 year. We will be thinking of a decade and how we defend ourselves during that decade and how many lives will be lost, and how we make sure that more disadvantaged people have access to treatments and so on. But when Kathleen Carico, with whom I was actually 10 days ago, was working on the mRNA as a vehicle for vaccines. 20 years ago, everybody told her it was impossible. She actually lost jobs. Nobody funded her. So she lost jobs in US institutions because she was unable to get grants, because her ideas were crazy, they were impossible, right? It took a situation where there was no other option for somebody to listen to Kathleen Carico and start working on the mRNA vaccine that is the basis for Moderna and Pfizer. I think we all have those in the room, right? But it was impossible. It was impossible. And I think funders and organizations only accepted to face the impossible when they had no other option. Do we have any other option for coral reefs? I believe we get to the last stand for coral reefs where we have no other option than to try the impossible.
Is that on?
Yes.
I think we have to be careful with unlimited sort of optimism, right? And I think this is where it becomes quite tricky because a sort of over-optimistic solution it'll just be the same as actually not acting. And so I think you need, comfortably to sort of work out what those limits are. And I think they stand side by side. You have some real sort of blue sky stuff that has to go ahead and sink or float, versus the way things like the initiative are going, which is to sort of manage the system as you, of course, stabilize greenhouse gas emissions, but keep those sort of vital sort of ignition cores going, because it doesn't cost you a lot. It's not the same as trying to invent a robo coral. And so I think we have to be very careful with that. Anyway, that was just, there's clearly a very good part of this is for debating, I think. So it's great.
But that's where we have options are possible, evaluates proposals, and selects among the proposals the best proposals that can have a future.
It sounds a lot like a debate between resilience and restoration. Okay, so I had another question that you triggered in this particular conversation. I'm struggling with the word resilience. How do we define the word resilience, both internally and also for the general public? Maybe I'll ask Dr. Abura, there you are, just so we can hear from other panelists, or Jennifer maybe.
Okay, thank you. So that is an interesting question, and so as a bit of background, I've been very much involved from 20 years ago in working on reef resilience and trying to develop and monitoring and assessment processes to look at it. Scientists have trouble with the term resilience because it's quite hard to define explicitly and to quantify it, and it's a bit of a relative concept, but people really understand resilience. It's a great concept, and resilience is the ability to cope with threats, to bounce back from disturbances, and to continue on more or less the same as you were before, or with the same functions. Maybe things change a bit over time. And I think it's it's a critical concept. It really helps. You can understand it at the planetary level, working a lot on planetary boundaries now and resilience of the planetary system. And you can talk about it at the local level in terms of how a reef is able to cope with the changes that are coming. And what changes we really understand actually take that place out of its comfort zone and make it impossible for it to be the same as it was before. And then you can think about, well, what kind of a new resilient system can we build up that is a good one and that sustains people and sustains new biodiversity, as opposed to being, a polluted or a sick place that doesn't really help people move forward. So I think resilience is a critical concept. I think restoration is a very important part of that. And you can have restoration actions across the whole scope, from maintaining the natural resistance ability of a place to actually replacing bits that have gone because they've died off, such as corals. And I think that whole gamut is important to look at. And I think CORDAP is certainly considering that, and many different resilience and restoration programs are looking across the whole scope now for coral reefs and then in other systems as well.
David did a great job of defining what resilience is, and I hit on resilience-based management, so it's taking those principles into account. What is the innate resilience of corals? How do you harness that, and how do you use that in your conservation activities, whether that is protecting areas that are already in good shape and keeping them from further decline, or restoring highly degraded areas. So you had said the debate between resilience versus restoration. I don't think there's a debate there. Both are necessary, and it's a continuum of different types of conservation activities that you do. And I would also say that, as people travel the world and discover where more corals are, we found out that corals themselves are incredibly resilient. We found corals at the mouth of the Amazon River that are in horrible water conditions, but they're thriving. You find corals in the Red Sea that have adapted to very high temperatures. We have corals that are in the upper parts of the Northern Marianas that are in very limiting environmental conditions that they've adapted to. So I think the corals themselves are amazing little buggers that are plastic, and they're going to outwit us. And it's, can we take those really resilient corals and make sure that we use those in our conservation and management plans?
Thank you very much. Before I pass it on to the floor for any questions here, and just for the benefit of the live stream, and without taking it off the rails of climate specifically, but in my amateur observations out there diving since I was 4, it seems and it feels like it's a much more complex discussion, that the coral reef ecosystem is a 4-legged stool. And if you knock one of those legs because of climate change, because of pollution, because of overconsumption of natural resources, overfishing, et cetera, if you give the coral reef ecosystem a break, it does have a tendency to resist one of those factors. But if you start inputting too many factors, that's when you have the major problems. So again, the impossible versus the resilience versus everything else. But I would love to open this up to the floor to see if there are any actual questions. Ambassador.
Well, thanks for that fantastic panel presentation, really helpful. Look, I was in Svalbard recently and I saw stuff coming out of the ocean which the scientists present said to me, we expect to see this in the Atlantic. Svalbard, even though it's up above the Arctic Circle, is now a North Atlantic ecosystem. And of course that is happening all around the world. That's no news to you guys. Life is moving away from the poles, and I'm sure all of you are experiencing that in some way. So to the poles, from the equator, from us in Fiji, way south. If you live north of the equator, it's moving up north to Svalbard. Okay, so that makes me think, and this is all along the lines of what we were talking about earlier, of solutions that can be financed. You take the coastline of Australia, for example. Is it possible to help nature by preparing landing grounds for coral further south from the Great Barrier Reef? You know, coral travels as spores on ocean currents and all the rest. Or Carlos's wonderful idea about seeding by drones, you know, 1 trillion corals planted by underwater drones. I love that idea. But the technical question to the panel, can we help nature as life moves north and south away from the equator? Can we help nature in terms of coral by preparing landing grounds for it?
I grew up in Sydney and was a skin diver and knew every nook and cranny on reefs around Manly, and there was never a coral there. There was a few little butterfly fish that came like Nemo down the East Australian current. I heard someone say to me, referred to corals of Manly in Sydney, and sure enough, they've sparked up. You've got corals, you've got that. And so you could potentially have places where they could settle. Red coralline algae, for example, are a preferred substrate for corals to settle. So you could sort of start to put this stuff out. But there's one problem, and that is that it's not about temperature only in the region. You've got things like the alkalinity is very different to where they come from on the reef. So there's a few stumbling blocks. So the corals are there, and when I went to see them, of course, I was amazed. But they're really nuggety little guys, nuggly little buggers, did you say? But they are certainly not the rich, luxurious coral you'd see. So I suppose just to end here, I suppose, yes, I suppose you could. Whether it's the number one option you want to spend your money on, I guess that's the second question. And I think that lurks below the surface in a lot of what we're talking about here, is can you afford to do what we're doing? And of course, you'll prove me wrong, and that'll be great.
Yes, so I'd like to take you to the other shore of Australia, to the Indian Ocean, where I was leading an institute during 5 years. So there we also see corals crawling south along the shorelines of Perth and Western Australia. But then they came to displace kelps. So the outcry was about kelp dying off and being replaced by corals. And so then we humans have a problem. Corals don't have a problem. They will be there. When many human generations will be gone, they'll still be there. But the problem is for us that we will not have the corals to support our livelihoods, to defend our shorelines. The problem is that a coral reef takes about 5,000 years to form. So we do have coral settling in areas where they could not grow before, but it's going to take a long time before they are fully functional ecosystems. So yes, they will be there. There will be coral reefs 5,000 years from now still, but the problem will be that we'll have a number of human generations deprived of coral reefs. So yes, that will happen, but the problem is not that we need to help corals, and that we need to help us cope with the changes and make sure that we help coral reefs that are still in existence continue to be functional. So that's a challenge. I don't want to prove of wrong, but I think science advances by developing new concepts and superseding what was the status quo at one point by redefining the rate of the possible. So I led a paper 2 years ago called Rebuilding Marine Life, where we pledged that it is possible to rebuild the abundance of marine life in human generation by 2050 by doing smart things, right? Coral reefs are the hardest component to rebuild. Maybe the fight is not to lose them, not to lose, but we can even push the boundaries and even hope at rebuilding, not just conserving. But one of the examples that gave me hope, and as Ove said, there's optimism, but there's also hope, is that in 1978, we only had 200 humpback whales left in the ocean. And every biologist would thought that they were due for earmark for extinction. Now the International Whaling Commission established the moratorium. Now we have, 40 years later, we have 60,000 humpback whales in the ocean. Yeah, in 1978, probably anybody would have said that it was impossible to save humpback whales. It's not a small organism, it's a very large giant of the ocean. But we start seeing miracles coming over and over if we don't lose hope and do the needful in terms of work to get the outcomes that we seek. So I'm very happy to prove myself wrong. I'm very happy to prove anybody wrong, in as long as that brings better futures for our children and grandchildren.
Thank you very much. You have a question? Yes.
Hello. Hello, Simon Cripps, WCS. I'm really nervous of asking this question, but if I can't ask it here and get the world's experts to answer it, please don't take this as aggressively critical. It really isn't. I'm a scientist. I would love to be convinced. I worry about restoration in terms of replanting. I think that corals are more like whales than forests. You can replant a forest. But I'm a gardener. You know, when a plant dies out in a particular part of your garden, you don't usually replant it because the conditions aren't right, the soil is wrong. And it worries me that we are working at too small a scale if we're just replanting little bits of coral. To me, oh, he's gone. To me, restoration is much bigger scale, reducing stresses, and putting the right environment so that there can be restoration. I would be interested to be convinced if there is any benefit in actual reseeding, but for me it looks like restoration should be at a much bigger scale. Happy to be proved wrong.
Great question. We actually have to do it at scale. But we also have to address why corals are in the condition that they are. You can't just use restoration as your recovery strategy. You have to address water quality issues, you have to address fishing, you have to address what's coming off the land. It's death by 1,000 paper cuts at this point. So restoration is certainly part of a plan, but not the only part of your plan. And getting to the point where does planting corals make sense? It makes sense in areas where you've lost a lot of that structure, and even if you have corals that are still sexually reproducing, those gametes can't find each other anymore because they're too far apart. So areas like Florida, the Caribbean, we need to get that structure back out that brings in other ecosystem components and gives it sort of a kickstart to be able to self-sustain. So the strategy that we'll take in Florida and the Virgin Islands and the Caribbean will be different than what's happening in the Great Barrier Reef because they're in a different situation. So it's all about adapting these technologies and knowledge to be locally relevant and to work. But to your point, restoration isn't the end-all be-all. It is part of a comprehensive plan.
So if I can make one quick point on that, it brings together a couple of other points in terms of change and how far into the future to look, especially thinking from an investor perspective about, you know, how to de-risk investments and what will the conditions be like in 40 or 50 years. Now, there's a result that came out of the IPCC IPBES report that I was part of last year, and it's a paper we're trying to put out now because actually, so we call it climate velocity as the technical term for it. But it turns out that climate velocity, so the movement of a particular climatic sort of envelope, is about 5 times faster in the ocean than it is on land. And so corals and other marine species will move much larger distances than what we're seeing terrestrial species doing. And that's really important for thinking about, okay, well, in terms of improving conditions for reefs and direct restoration, what should be done in place over here and what should be done 200 kilometers down the coastline for this particular climate belt. for where it's going to be in 20 or 30 or 40 or 50 years. So I think it's really important. The R&D on this is essential. If we don't do the research, we'll never have the answers. We do have to do that blue sky research on all types of restoration practices so that we have a portfolio to use as we need it further down the line. I think it's very important to invest in that.
Yeah, thank you, Julien Marco from WWF. I just wanted to go back to the conversation on the possible versus impossible, because this is absolutely something I find very challenging in any conversation, particularly with the public and with the youth. And the communication side of that conversation is so important. That narrative is so important that we get it right, because the youth in particular is now oscillating between doom and gloom and naivety, and is a very complicated emotional shift for many of them, delivering, as you know, this kind of new eco-anxiety feeling of wanting to do more, getting angry from not seeing action, and at the same time, not really be sure that anything can be done. So getting their narrative right, and I have to say, in our experience at WWF, it's not either or. It's not either aiming for the impossible or try to prioritize for what's actually we know is possible. It's actually embracing both. And investing in what we know can work is absolutely a must, but at the same time, I completely agree, try to redefine what actually impossible means and leaving that space open for increased impact over time is equally important. So I kind of felt in that discussion there was a kind of either or, is either possible or impossible. Actually, let's embrace both, because we have an urgent crisis, we need to act on where we know we can make a difference now, but at the same time, we need to really push for more, because accepting 90% of coral reefs loss is just not what I was born with in my own vision of the world.
I'm so glad you brought that up, because I was thinking to myself, one of the questions I wanted to ask the panel, which I probably won't, but want to, is how comfortable you all are in moving between the science and the emotion. Because I hear words that are emotional. I hear hope, I hear optimism, I hear love, I hear these other things, right? The next generation, the ones who will have this charge, are not as afraid to commingle their upset and their anger over this intergenerational injustice with the science. And so when we do talk about resilience, it does resonate, right? And if it's hard to explain, we got to get over that. We got to get right through and find out what they think impossible is, right? Because if we don't actually recruit them to this task, the science won't matter. And it is encouraging to me, but I know that that discomfort with mixing science and hope. And I'm sad, but I'm optimistic, but I have science, but I don't know what to do with it, right? We have to get better at that. And we may not in our lifetimes, but those that are going to actually have this task are more comfortable working in that fluid space. And so I welcome the discomfort to ask them what they believe is impossible, and what resilience means to them, because we're timing out, right? The corals may not be, but it'll be up to the next generation to ensure that.
Yeah, that's a great point. At the end of the day, we have to base our decisions on facts and science, but emotions is what drives action. So you're absolutely right. That was the crux of why I was talking about the impossible in the beginning. I know we have to move forward on the next panel, which is resilient reefs and resilient communities. So with that, I'm going to pass the mic over to my co-host.
Thanks, Fabian. We have Carl Deering now from CARE International. I think we've talked about one aspect more on the ecosystem side and the impact. I think it's really important to think about this challenges also from a gender and a people perspective and a social development lens as well. So if you'd like to welcome Carl, please.
Thanks, Carol. This is on the mic. Thanks for the introduction and greetings to fellow panelists and distinguished guests. It's a pleasure to be here. I work with CARE. It's not the kind of space that CARE normally floats around in. Marine science, CARE is an international development and humanitarian agency, but we're very proud to be working with WWF for more than 15 years now on the nexus of conservation and development, and this is one of our more exciting programs. When I told management that I wanted CARE to engage with the Coral Reef Rescue Initiative, their eyes rolled and said, what would we be doing on a program like that, until I told them the numbers, the data that we have on dependency of communities on reef systems, and particularly vulnerability data and particularly gender-based vulnerability. So I've just got three things to say. I've got a cameo with no slides. One is a particular challenge around social equity issues, and I was really glad, David, that you brought up the issue of equity earlier. The second issue is that we have solutions to this challenge, and then a brief note on the opportunity in front of us. The challenge is related to the fact that climate change impacts people in different ways, for different reasons, in different places, at different times of the year. And the most acute manifestation of that differential vulnerability is based on gender. If you are a woman dependent on coral reef fisheries, you are immediately more vulnerable to the impacts of climate change because of other intersectional and compound vulnerabilities. So that's basically the challenge, and I won't go into the detail here because the sort of the denial of rights and restrictions on access to resources, to incentives, to rewards for women and men in small-scale coastal fisheries are well documented, and it's unacceptable. And that's no different from terrestrial agriculture, where CARE has most of its experience. But what we have, and this is the good part, is we have solutions. And yesterday, Ambassador, I was impressed the way you mentioned that pollution is fixable, overfishing is fixable, but gender inequality is fixable. And we have proven solutions to be able to do that. And we've been working with conservation partners, as I said, for a decade at least with WWF on applying those solutions. And it brings multiple returns in terms of food security, nutrition, mobility, access to health, lots and lots of societal and developmental benefits if gender inequality is tackled head on. During the design phase of the Coral Reef Rescue Initiative, we engaged with the gender team at James Cook, at the Centre of Excellence at James Cook University, as well as gender specialists at World Fish and the gender team at CARE. And we looked into the specifics of gender-based vulnerability in coral reef systems, and we looked at solutions through a framework, and that framework looks for change across three domains. The first domain is agency, human agency. So actions addressing the capacities, the knowledge, the information, the confidence, the esteem that women have and men have in reef systems. So an innovative model that we have in terrestrial agriculture, for example, is farmer, field and business schools, and we're really excited about the possibilities of dragging that learning and that model into the Coral Reef Programme, because we have seen, as I say, returns in terms of household health, increased incomes, increased production, increased mobility for women, and reductions in gender-based violence. And I think that is an issue that we should all take note of, because there are expectations and responsibilities to address gender-based violence in all of our programming. The second domain is structures. It's actions that would promote women's voice and leadership in the governance of natural resources and coral reef management. So that could be community-based natural resource management committees, as well as, for example, subnational and national formal structures for governance, opening spaces for women's leadership and voice in those processes. And the third domain, and this is where it does become tricky, or not tricky, but a bit more complex, and the conservation community, as well as many in the development community, have tend to shy away from this. And it's the issue, the domain of relations, human relations, particularly intimate partner relations at household level, and it's to do with overcoming or tackling harmful social norms and barriers that underpin inequality and that deny women access to resources or mobility, for example, or decision-making power over income. The opportunity, let me stop on the solutions. As I say, we're excited about applying these. The opportunity for applying these gender transformative approaches are here in this Coral Reef Rescue Initiative, and it is the frontier of good practice in food systems transformation. It's got a lot of traction within the Committee on Food Security and all of the Food Systems Summit dialogues last year. So there's a lot more interest in this area, and if we do want resilient reefs and resilient ecosystems, we need resilient communities. And resilience, and it's fascinating the discussion earlier about the definition of resilience in ecosystems. In human development, the definition is about anticipation, absorption, adaptation to shocks and stresses, but it's also about transformation. Transformation is a key part of the resilience paradigm within human development. And to do that, we have to tackle these three domains: the relations, the structures, and the agency. I'm really excited about the possibilities, and the Coral Reef Rescue Initiative, I think, is going to be at the forefront of dragging that learning from the development world into conservation, because we do know that the more gender equal a society is, the more food secure it is as well. Thanks. I'll leave it there.
Thanks, Carl. We have two more speakers left, and then we will finish the event. There's another event happening right after this. We have from the Green Climate Fund, Professor Kevin Horsberg, to share.
Thanks very much. Thanks for the opportunity to speak today. And I should say I'm delighted to be here both on behalf of the fund but also personally, because before I joined the fund just over a year ago, I was a research oceanographer for 25 years. So these issues are, to me, very, very personal. So with that, I'm delighted to be able to say that the fund has been able to invest $125 million into the Global Fund for Coral Reefs, which is a unique public-private partnership model, the intention being that we use that GCF funding to crowd in significant additional private investment funding alongside an already existing grant window, which is publicly funded, which is being well managed by a number of UN agencies, UNDP, UNEP, UNCDF, and to bring these things together to form a substantial fund in support of sustainable businesses to protect coral reefs, effectively to provide, using Fabian's analogy, three of those legs of the stool as best we can to strengthen those other three legs. I'm going to say a little bit more about the fund and its structure and some of its novelty in a second, ending on some very good news. I'll leave that hanging. But just to take things back to when the fund was being proposed, within the GCF we receive proposals and we assess those proposals, and part of my job is looking for the evidence base. So for adaptation proposals, we not surprisingly, require there to be an evidence-based analysis of the proposal. And normally that requires some iteration. With the Global Fund for Coral Reefs, I'm delighted to say, and it's a tribute to all of the great science that's been done and that's represented in this room, that wasn't an issue for a nanosecond. I mean, the proposal that we saw was replete with the strongest scientific backing, a lot of it coming from the IPCC report, to make the evidence base for this, the science that's behind it, incontrovertible. And then very pleased to be able to say that we worked with our partner on this, Pegasus, and with others like the WWF and UNDP, to then sort of structure the business side of the fund around how it would make its investment in three primary areas: sustainable ocean production, sustainable ecotourism, and sustainable infrastructure, waste management, and circular economy. So in so doing, strengthening three of those legs of the stool in order to pull coral reefs as far away as possible from the tipping point being induced by climate change. So the Global Fund for Coral Reefs, you will hear a lot about it this week, I think. It's a first in many ways for us and also for the community. It's the first at-scale private sector investment in the blue economy, in coral reefs specifically. It's the first multi-country programme focusing on sustainable oceans. For ourselves, for the fund, it's one of the largest equity investments that we've made, investing 125 million in order to leverage, hopefully up to 500 million. And it's also one of the first investments where we've designed that investment window alongside an already existing technical assistance window, which is a good model for being able to design quality projects, quality investments, which the equity fund can then invest in. So all of that marks out the Global Fund for Coral Reefs as a first of its kind. And I think I just want to finish by sharing a piece of news. Without sending the room to sleep with the bureaucracy of our processes, when proposals are finally approved, we have what's called a funding accreditation agreement. Once that is enacted, then that's a commitment to spend the money. And I'm very pleased to say that yesterday the legalese was finally signed off. The FAA is effective as of yesterday, and we can now with confidence expect that fund to go ahead. I'm a physical oceanographer. I don't know what the timescales for crowding in private investment are, but that catalytic capital is now there, and we hope that it will catalyse the remainder of that fund to then invest in significant high-quality businesses in sustainable coral reefs. Thanks very much.
We have a slight change in the program. Unfortunately, Carlos Manuel Rodriguez had a conflict, and we'll be making an announcement together in the media zone at 3 o'clock. But today we have Marco Lambertini, who is a part of the WWF family, and our Director General, making a small announcement on some of the progress we've made with the GEF.
Thank you very much. This is going to be quite an unusual and role to play, to say the least, and you will understand in a minute why. Because the CEO and the chairperson of the GF, Carlos Manuel Rodriguez, you all know, asked me to make an announcement I should have made. And so the announcement is actually quite exciting because GF7 has actually approved the Coral Reef Rescue Initiative for 6 countries, Fiji, Solomon Islands, Indonesia, Philippines, Tanzania, Madagascar. The partnership is very exciting as well. Many are around this room. It's RARE, Wilder Conservation Society, CARE International, Blue Ventures, University of Queensland, and WWF. And the amount, and now this is the temptation to double the amount straight away, but I don't think I'm allowed to do that. So I'll stick to the amount. I'll stick to the amount that I was told to announce. That is of $7.8 million. So it's a foundational investment. It's super exciting. We'll build on that. And I cannot also forget to mention that this has been made possible by a number of other donors that inputted at a very early stage into this initiative. And one is just beside me. Philippe Proufer is the head of the IEEP Foundation, Brazilian. And so thank you, Philippe, for making this happen. And thank you particularly, GEF7, for this great contribution to the initiative. So that's my announcement.
Thank you, Marco. We'll be coming down to the closing end of our program today. Ambassador Peter Thompson unfortunately had to leave, and he just thanks everybody for attending today. He really enjoyed the discussion and the panelists, and he'd love to reconvene this group because I think there's a lot more to be discussed and to harness from this group as well. So he just wanted to personally thank everybody for being here. And I just wanted to thank our co-organizers as well, ICRI and CORDAP and the GFCR and WWF and the Coral Reef Rescue Initiative partners as well, who made the time to be here and to share their knowledge and experience as well. And I have Fabian to help me close as well. So thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Carol. You've been a good friend and inspiration to all of us and of course, to the coral reefs. On my behalf, having taken up being third generation ocean explorer and voice for the ocean, it's an absolute blessing to be amongst all of you today and to see how much work is being done to help shepherd the health of our ocean, especially the coral reefs and its creatures who do not have a voice to fend for themselves. We have a lot to do, and we need to work together. I know that it's very easy to walk away from these kinds of groups and start concentrating on our daily lives and be distracted by the things that we must focus on. But at the end of the day, we're not going to get out of this without working together. And it's not about the coral reefs. It's not even about nature. It's about ourselves. And by that I mean that if we are to give back to our future generations what we've taken for granted, if we are to imagine a better place for our children, for the next generations, than we found it, then selfishly, that self-preservation aspect is all about conservation. This is a closed-loop system, and we need to start with the fundamentals so that we can gather the general public to be part of our team. We have to change the language. There is no such thing as throwing something away. It's a closed-loop system. We live on a little oasis in space. We're seeing those repercussions. We should stop calling things seafood. It's objectifying the value that those tangible assets, that natural resource bank account that we depend on, that's going bankrupt. There are no bailout loans. So just with these concepts, to be able to call things sea life, to be able to look at coral reefs as rainforests and all the value, that Pandora's box of discoveries left in front of us, that will give us the ability to tackle in innovative ways the challenges that we face today. It's essential for all of us to pool our resources and to work together. And with that, it is absolutely humbling to be amongst all of you and to listen to the richness that you bring to the table. But we have a long road ahead of us, and we need to make the impossible possible. So with that, I would love to see us get back together at some point soon with a task, with a singular goal that we can all reach and we can all accomplish, and we can report back next time. I don't know what that is, and I will not task you with it because it's not my responsibility, but I would be happy to participate in that task with you all as a community, as a global community, for the betterment of our next generations. So thank you all so very much, and I look very much forward to progress and to making the place a better place for our children. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
home to 1 in every 3 species of marine animals. Coral ecosystems are the rainforests of the sea, but 2/3 of corals worldwide have already disappeared. And with global warming expected to likely exceed 1.5 degrees centigrade within the decade, we risk losing those that remain in the next 10 years. Even if we meet the most ambitious climate mitigation targets, reducing greenhouse emissions and improving local marine conservation measures can help, but are not enough. The G20 has agreed to establish a global coral research and development accelerator platform to bring together the best scientific minds to scale up next-generation science and technology solutions before it's too late. We ask that you join us for our oceans, to protect the economies and societies that depend on corals, and to help secure a future for them.
Good morning, everybody. Good morning. Good morning. just to say a few words quickly. Good morning. The next event is about to start on thematic debt, accelerating the blue economy. We would ask you to please take your conversations outside the room, but of course you're welcome to join us. Shall I do a wolf whistle? Okay. Good morning, everyone. Good morning. Good morning. This is just to announce, hello, David, just to announce that the next event on thematic debt, accelerating the blue economy, where we're going to be talking about coral bonds and different types of biodiversity finance for the blue economy, is starting in a few minutes. So we please ask you to leave if you're not joining us, but of course you're very welcome. Thank you.
Basically, we have to build them. We need to build them. There's some other accelerators, and we need to build the biodiversity program. We have some plans.
Maybe we can reach out and learn what you're doing.
Just say hello.
I know, but please join us.
I'm actually such a sustainable.
Yeah, it's so good to see you. Are you well? Good. Great. Congratulations on your award. But we're trying to make this global.
So how shall we? 4 seats. How shall we sit?
Yes, I think
On the side, back, another back.
You're not on the next event, right? Okay. Do you want to leave us here? It's a little bit of confusion. Are you staying till?
Hello, hello. Okay, working. Great. Yeah, thank you. I think we'll close the door and yeah. So we're about 15 minutes late. So I guess we try to compress this into 1 hour. You know, as you know, we are at the second UN Ocean Conference, right, which is about how we can speed up our collective efforts to achieve the SDG 14. And we all know that the SDG 14 is critically important for humanity, right, for planet, and for biodiversity and so forth. But of course, you know, SDG 14 is also connected to many other, you know, SDGs, right? And the materialization of which require financing, right? Which is what, you know, this session is going to focus on. And so today we're very happy to have a really very experienced panel who have worked in financing, you know, for not only you know the financing issue as such, but really has a focus on environment, on you know, blue financing, on green financing. So we have panelists who have brought a lot of experience in this. I will ask them to introduce themselves shortly. But to start with, we know that the development in relation to ocean, especially in small island developing states, require a lot of financing. But according to the that, you know, sustainability analysis that's conducted recently by the IMF, you know, they assessed the 20, you know, seats, 15 out of which are already in debt stress or facing serious risk of, you know, debt stress, while 4 others are in moderate stages of, you know, debt stress. It just shows that the needs, you know, are significant, but the ability to raise funding, you know, is constrained. And at the same time, you know, while the debts, you know, are increasing, the risks associated with climate, with their immediate environment in which they live, the biodiversity they rely on, and so forth, these risks are also increasing, right? So, so what can we do, right? Right. As we're dealing with these kind of issues, but we also see the phenomenon increase in, you know, in blue bonds issuance. For example, in so-called the GSSI, right, the governance sustainability linked bonds, you know, issuance have also increased. I understand that in 2018, such, you know, bonds, you know, from both private and public issuance, you know, is about $200 billion. But by 2021, you know, these, you know, bonds, you know, have increased to $1 trillion, right? So there's a tremendous interest in this. But how much of this really also, you know, are going to the countries that really need them, right? And I think this is the kind of questions that we want to explore a little bit today. And so I have really a very prominent, you know, panelist, very experienced in the field. So I will, in fact, ask them to introduce themselves. Then I will maybe ask them a set of questions. Okay. So let me maybe start, you know, from the other end of this. You know, Marcus. You know, please, maybe Ms. Marcus Muller. If you can introduce yourself.
Thank you very much for having me. So I'm responsible for the thematic research of Deutsche Private Bank. So I'm heading the Chief Investment Office of Deutsche Bank Private Bank. I'm by background economist and sinologist, so I studied Chinese. So therefore it's a real pleasure to be with you on the same panel, Hao-Liang. And we've started to think about secular shifts in our socio-economic world a couple of years ago. And one of these big shifts it's not a trend, it's a shift. So something which will change the world we are living in is really the question of ESG, sustainability. And as the topic of climate has landed already in our society, and I do not say that it's solved, right? It has landed in the discussion of society, which is a prerequisite for solving a problem. We have been focusing then deliberately at Deutsche Bank on biodiversity and in this field on oceans, and this is underpinned by our belief in nature as capital. So natural accounting, I will talk about this a little bit later. Further on, I'm a lecturer for corporate finance at different universities, and my in general focus from my academic studies is the transformation of societies. I'm from Germany, so therefore forgive me if I'm sometimes too negative, but I will give a reason for this.
Hello, my name is Imen Moussa. I'm a director at Credit Suisse. I work in structured credit. And I was privileged because I was part of the team who structured the Belize Blue Bond, so hence I'm here. Definitely Credit Suisse is really engaged on the ocean side. For us it's really important. We know how important it is as well for climate and heat, etc., in addition to biodiversity. So we're very engaged into that. By background, I'm engineer with master in statistics, and I'm from Tunisia.
Hello everyone, and thank you for the invite today. I'm Alberto Casorati. I work for the European Investment Bank, and I'm an investment officer focused on impact finance for the green transition, which of course includes the blue economy. As you can imagine, the European Investment Bank is really focused on climate, and the blue economy is really an important part of such a strategy. And yeah, I'm Italian, and my background is in finance, so I studied finance. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you very much. Okay, so I just a couple of words about myself. I guess I'm Hao Liangshu. I'm heading UNDP's Bureau for Policy and Program Support. For UNDP, we are working in 170 countries and territories, and really to support them with a goal to support them to achieve the Sustainable Development Goals. And one of the areas where we're working on is try to, and I would say, both leverage financing for the development objectives of these countries, but also to really help align the resources that are in both private and public sectors, so that these investments are supportive of the SDGs, right? So both to leverage and to align investments, because we know that public sector funding alone, right, will not be enough to achieve the Agenda 2030. Right? So we need all investments in public and private sector to be aligned to the goals of the sustainable development. So in this context, we're really happy that we have this panel. And one of the questions we try to get out of this panel is really to have a better understanding of what the banks are already doing, right, to move into the direction of not only pursue a business, right, to seek a sustainable business from the financial point of view, but really also doing good in the process, right, to ensure that their investments produce social and environmental benefits, ensure these benefits so that we have a sustainable future, right. So I have two blocks of questions. One is, generally what your institutions are doing, right, in this regard. What products you have to support, the sustainable development. And the second block of questions, I would probably focus a bit more on the question of bonds, which have a lot of interest. But I know that, Alberto, for example, you work in privately, private banking, equity side a bit more. But I think it is also going to be very interesting for our audience to know not only the instruments that target public sector, right? But also I'm sure that a lot of countries, our audience are very interested in what options are there to really drive investment in the private equity area, impact investing and so forth. So if I may, I will start with you, Marcus. I have a question for you. Okay. So as Deutsche Bank, the blue economy offer, is part of the thematics of the private bank. Understand, right? So your view seems that everyone is committing to climate topics, but the biggest worry on biodiversity and ocean is not receiving enough attention, right? So what solutions can you offer, that not enough attention is paid to these kind of important areas? Yeah.
So an American author with German background said once, there is to each complex problem an answer which is simple, transparent, and wrong. And I think I do not want to say that we need to do complex solutions, but I rather want to say with this that we have to appreciate and to acknowledge the complexity of the world we are living in, to find for the various problems we have around us solutions. So this is the prerequisite for the understanding. What does it mean? It means that the planetary boundaries in general and the topics we discuss, ocean depletion, etc., are symptoms of something which I would call a market failure. And the market failure is that we do not value nature in our economic decisions. Because of not doing this, we do ignore nature in our economic policy decisions or in our economic decisions. This is not done deliberately because we are all mean. It's rather we have not done it. And this goes back to the question of what is value, what is price, what is stock, what is flow. And we are currently not assessing the stocks, natural stocks, the world we are living in, our habitat. So we are not excluded out of nature, we are embedded in nature. And we do not value it, and therefore we do not consider it in our measurements. We just measure the flow via GDP. This is not wrong, but the GDP is not the right measurement for understanding the value of nature and keeping the ecosystem services we are all dependent on intact. So therefore, this is our predominant first answer. We need to find an answer to this before we can solve the other problems. But the time is running against us. So I would be very optimistic if we would not have this time pressure, because we are reaching tipping points. When it's broken, it's broken. It's very binary. So I think we need now to embrace the ambiguity of doing already adaptation. So we have to acknowledge that there is something broken, and we have to adapt to the new reality while exchanging the old economic model with a new economic model which takes exactly nature as capital into account, and we need to protect it. And we know this from marine protected areas, for instance, that they really can deliver more economic output if we have the right size, the right measurement of protection in place. And this is an example that this doesn't mean at the end that we all will suffer economically. And secondly, I think as nature happens locally, and as biodiversity is especially distributed in countries which do have problems with social security networks, etc., it can be one of the biggest inclusion programs of the world. But we have to consider that it is not about us in Europe, it is not about us in the US, it is about the global South in relation to us. Because at the end, and this is just a hint to the further discussion, we need nature for debt swaps, we need blue bonds. But the problem is that 2/3 of our global companies, be it listed or non-listed companies, have an impact on the oceans. We won't solve the issue with blue bonds. We won't solve the issue with debt for nature swaps. We need them to redirect, to channel investments, but we need to go in the value chain of the companies. And this is something what I would really put at center stage of our discussion. And then we will find the projects we will finance, because those projects are then the projects which will substitute the old economy, which we won't use anymore then if we have understood the underlying problem. So a long answer to a complex question.
we have to do this really hand over a little bit here. But thank you very much, Marcus, for setting the stage, really. I think you didn't answer my questions, but you set the stage perfectly, okay. But I think, I think you really pointed out a key issue, right? That is, simple financial solutions is not enough. You need the whole society to change the perspective and outlook, right, for how we run our economy in a way, right? So thank you very much for this. So let me ask, Imene, okay, so, I know you have worked on the blue economy, right, for some time, and also, so you have done, as you mentioned, some work on Belize, right, the debt swap issue. So you're very experienced in this. So can you, talk us through, some of these transactions, products that Credit Suisse has worked on, and so what are some of the examples that you think can bring us close to the goals we want to achieve, the driving sustainability and helping achieving sustainable development, while also really helping the developing countries to create the kind of fiscal space that they need, right, to support the development goals. Yeah, thank you.
Hello. So I will kind of start with a product that we developed, and actually that joined the idea that Marcus was mentioning. So we have developed, for example, the Ocean Engagement Fund, which is investing, which is a fund with that we worked with Rockefeller Asset Management, and it's mainly about investing in companies in our countries that are actually active in the ocean. And we're very engaged with these companies, so they kind of help protect the ocean. So this is kind of an example of just a product that we're selling to our investor, and which is more on the north side of the world. But ultimately, for me, in the context of SIDS, the Belize transaction makes a lot of sense because ultimately Belize is going through similar issues that other SIDS go through. So in 2020, with COVID, ultimately Belize was going through a rough time. There were less people going there for holidays, so the tourism impact was quite big. There were 16.7% reduction in shrinkage in the economy. But also debt to GDP went to 133%. So Belize was looking for a way to refinance, and they had this huge debt of 533 million in hard currency. So it was called super bond, and it was issued in 2007, and it was already restructured 3 times. So they were again in discussion with their bondholder to see what they can do. But at the same time, Belize was really engaged because I think all the SIDS realized that, and I have been on other panels with regard to SIDS, and everybody knows that ocean is the reason all these kind of island and the people who live in the ocean is a real resource, either like fishing, tourism, nature, everything is really important, is coming from the ocean. So ultimately, Belize was already very engaged in terms of conservation, and they have been talking at the time to the Nature Conservancy about what they could do. And the Nature Conservancy thought that they worked on the Seychelles Blue Bond a few years ago, so in 2016, which was also a debt swap, but smaller, and also involving a bilateral loan, which was kind of easier to kind of restructure. So in this case, for Belize, they were able to kind of reduce their debt. So in terms of debt saving, they saved 200 million. Both in principal and interest, and then they were also able to get 180 million savings over the 20 year to invest in conservation. And the transaction was done and was contingent on commitments from Belize towards the ocean. So other than the funds that are going to be spent on conservation and projects, the idea was that ultimately Belize was kind of, as I mentioned, keen to progress on the ocean conservation. TNC definitely, and many countries are looking at the 30 by 30 engagement, so protecting 30% of the ocean by 2030. So ultimately, Belize, to get this debt relief, was committed to increase the biodiversity protection zone from 15.9% to 30% by 2026, and also finalize a marine spatial protection planning, by 2026. These are like two of the lists of commitments that you can find on the TNC website that Belize was happy to engage in, so they can get the debt relief. So ultimately, people love the kind of this product because there are 2 points to it. There is the debt sustainability, so it's definitely helping Belize to actually, they decreased their debt to GDP by 12 points, thanks to the transaction, but also to create the kind of conservation that they are on their side in terms of commitments, but also in terms of funding. And the funding goes, first of all, to Conservation Trust Fund that is kind of spending like 4.2 million per annum, which is 3 times what Belize spent today, like before the transaction, on conservation and ocean, but also have in 20 years an endowment of 92 million, and they can continue to spend this money even for conservation, even after the whole transaction is done. And ultimately for Belize as well, it was the opportunity to kind of get new capital from private investor who never envisaged to invest in Belize debt. So it was also the opportunity to diversify the pool of investors. Sorry, it was a long.
So thank you very much. It was long. I could not even stop you, right? But since I don't have a microphone, but it's very fascinating, right? It's a lot of details. I think the world really needs case studies. You know, I think successful case studies, or even failures, you know, of efforts. I think what you described is really fascinating, right? And what I'm getting from it is that you know, there are different instruments, right? And some are more complex. I think what you described seems to be more complex than issuing a bond, you know. Right? But in this case, you know, not only you know, solve the immediate financial pressure, you know, the government faced, but also it seems that you have helped to reduce the debt stock, right, quite sizably. So I think it's really a fascinating example. So we can talk more, okay? And so Alberto, you know, you and your team work on a green transition, right? But I understand at EIB, your investment approach, you know, is a thematic impact financing, taking riskier projects and linked to innovation, right, in the green transition. So and I understand the blue economy is one of the pillars, you know, that you are working on. So can you describe, you know, your investment, you know, approaches and structure and the products a little bit, you know? Thank you.
Sure. Thank you for the question. I guess I bring a bit of a different perspectives compared to my colleagues here. I'm more focused on the private sector side. So in my everyday job, I'm focused on, as I said, thematic impact finance. And in particular, our focus is on the green transition. So my team is mainly providing venture debt product for innovative companies in the area of the green transition. This means 5 main areas. We cover the energy sector, the mobility sector, And then we cover also the circular economy, blue economy, bioeconomy, and the decarbonization of heavy industries. And the blue economy, of course, is a key part of our strategy in terms of investments. We have been in this area for a number of years, initially mainly related to the energy sector. So we have invested in new solutions which are ocean-based energy solutions, such as offshore wind energy, or we have also invested in wave energy solutions, which are very innovative and need to be proven at scale. Actually, both these projects are located outside the Portugal shores. And more recently, what we've been looking at is data from the ocean side as an enabler for the blue economy. If we're looking at developing really the blue economy, one of the missing element in the picture is the data, because oceans are really wide and difficult to explore, as we all know, given the harsh condition, and data is something very precious and difficult to collect. So, for example, in this area, recently we have looking at the company that is developing a new solution for collecting data in relation to different sectors, from fishery to wind, offshore wind, where instead of using standard vessels, which requires a crew and they are obviously more polluting, they are, for example, using uncrewed vessels. So they're basically working as drones on water. And so that's where what we are looking at, really at the edge of innovation, companies that are providing new solutions that can really help the transition that Marcus was talking about, not the old economy, but really the new and green economy.
So thank you very much, but I think this also sounds fascinating, because the sixth economy, the blue economy, needs really investment in all areas. Right? UNDP has rising up for SITS, so we call it SITS offer, and that has three elements. One clearly is climate change, right? One is digitalization, right, to help the countries to move to digital, competency, and the other is the blue economy. I think what you're describing is definitely what SITS needs as well. So thank you very much for this good example. So I have a lot of questions. I want to move to something more specifics. Okay, Marcus, you mentioned really a very important philosophy, right, in your investment approach. Okay, you mentioned the planetary boundaries, right, and the valuing ecosystem service, right? It's not just money flows, but how do you do it, right? So can you talk, a bit, specifically how you're helping investors using planetary boundaries, right, including nature, in accounting, to understand the value and the stock, right? Yeah.
And you're right, I didn't answer your first question directly because I forgot the following sentence, because how I described it, this is how we do it, or how we want to do it, because we need, and this is now the segue to the second question, and we will talk about this later. I think we've joined AURA, so the Ocean Risk Resilience and Action Alliance. Because of this collaboration with AURA, we've got the chance as a bank to understand the oceans. We are economists, and we should remain economists. We should not try to become biologists, because we would clearly fail. So we need a collaborative approach between those disciplines. And therefore, we can do all things we want to do because we know finance. Everyone here knows finance, but we have to do it right. We, of course, will learn out of failure, but at the end, we are also having a fiduciary duty. For the assets we manage on behalf of our clients with a dedicated objective. If either the objective is return or risk, or return and risk and quality means impact / supporting a transition. Before we can fulfill our fiduciary duty, we need to know a lot of things. And I have to say, I'm hesitant sometimes to put too much enthusiastic products out where I'm not really sure of whether it will work. Because this can destroy the trust of investors in an emerging field. And therefore it's important that we have maybe a kind of collaborative approach, and we need governments. I agree that we have to increase a private part in it, but we also need the de-risking part of it. We need stable projects. We need transparency around this. And the transparency won't come from if everyone is doing this in silos. So what I'm always getting a little bit nervous about is everyone is talking on these panels about what they do. But what do we do together? Everyone is talking to each other, but I would like to make an assessment after such conferences, what kind of cooperative activities really have been then the outcome of those conferences. We need to go beyond pledges. And this is something where we also need to educate the clients. And then this is also what we are doing. So we've trained, for instance, all of our employees in the private bank about ESG and sustainability in the last year. Everyone got the training. And this is important because if our advisors are sitting in a client meeting and not feeling comfortable to answering the questions, they won't get there. Not because of they don't want, they do not feel comfortable. And we should not forget, we spent so many years at university to understand finance. How shall we learn oceans or ESG in general in 2 to 3 years? It will take time. But the ocean literacy, the environmental literacy is a prerequisite for feeling comfortable. But at the same time, this puts pressure again on us because this is a normal social development which won't be done in 1 year, in 2 years, in 3 years. So we have to do this in parallel. And then now in very short, we are talking about the bellwethers in our daily television senders about the stock exchange. But there is no ocean. There is no hint to the world we're living in. We are just talking about a tiny percent of the global companies which are listed. But the 95% of the companies which are the backbone of our societies, the small and mid-cap companies, no one is talking about them. We need to find solutions there. If the big companies change, this is great. This is a great use case. But how to leverage this in the 90%, 95% of our economy? This is a big question. And lastly, we need to find an answer to the Global South. What is your opportunity? If I speak to projects in the Global South, and I've did this now in London, not that London is in the Global South, but during a client meeting, and we currently, not we as a bank, we as a global village have not an answer to a family in parts of Africa or in Latin America, how they can feed their family tomorrow if we change rapidly the local infrastructure of their country. We need to find answers for this. And this is a little bit the challenge where I'm puzzled because we are talking among us and this sounds great, but the challenges are really, really huge. So therefore these education and these cooperation, we need to think about financing projects which are maybe polycentric. Local staggered projects brought together and financed through one facility. Because we know it from our banks, and maybe you disagree or maybe you agree, some of the projects are too small for doing the due diligence, for really giving the money. And they are too intransparent. They are maybe very good, but we do not know it. And what is traded at stock exchanges? Expectation based on information. The better the information, the better the expectation, the higher the willingness of an investor to engage. And this is where we need all together to go in, and there we can just play a role together, but not alone.
I agree with you, Marcus.
No, thank you very much, Marcus. I think clearly you're speaking from your position as a managing director and the global head of the chief investment office, right? So you're looking at some systemic issues, right? So I think I appreciate that, and I think you also highlighted the importance of knowledge base, right? Not only of financing, but really other areas of sustainability, right? Because without understanding that, you cannot engage, productively with the kind of clientele, right? That are interested in these kind of issues, right? So thank you. And I think you also brought up a question that, the changes, in financing, right? is an issue not only for a number of big players. The challenge is to, in my language, is perhaps bring this kind of discussion to all boardroom, to the boardrooms of all companies. I mean, that's what needs to take place, right? Because otherwise, it's just not enough, right? To change what you are describing is the really different philosophy, of the economy. As you said, beyond, in the UN, we're also discussing beyond the GDP, right? Many countries are measuring their success based on their GDP or GDP per capita, but it is this kind of economic philosophy that has brought us to where we are today, right? On the brink of like biodiversity breakdown, and climate crisis and so forth. Right? So we really needed to only really agree with you and to do more, what you are describing as needed. So thank you very much. Okay. Now, from this more broad, perspective, I wanted to ask Imani a question more specifically, right? So I want to ask with you, okay, and how does the blue economy, right, this notion of blue economy, fit in with your climate or your investment themes, right, that the banks clients are looking for, right? Are they looking for products that really talk about the blue economy, or they just are looking for a return, right? So thank you.
So ultimately, the investors are looking for blue economy, and like we saw in the market. I'm talking about the debt market here, that there were a lot of demand at some point, especially in 2020, 21. Now it's a bit kind of has faded a bit, but mainly because of all the greenwashing issues. So people are now kind of more try to understand better before they invest, which makes sense ultimately. So that's a good move ultimately, because it means that the next green or blue investment will have more impact than the one that maybe we've seen. So that's definitely very important. I think that the investors are also, for example, in the case of Belize, again, just to use as a concrete example, we've been selling, so Credit Suisse is the one who financed initially, but we sold the blue bonds to our investor, and it was oversubscribed. It went into mainly insurance company and pension funds in Europe, US, Americas, and Asia, especially Japan. So definitely is something that people are looking for. The other point that I found brave as well is people went into details, because ultimately it's not the typical transaction is not just a blue bond where the proceeds are used for a specific reason. So people were looking at it and we're kind of very, very happy about the impact. And it's mainly coming back to what Marcus was saying. It's mainly about partnership. I agree. I'm a finance person. I need someone, and same. I went through training. I had my little course, etc. But the main point is that we need also to rely on people who know what they are doing. So for us, the partnership with the Nature Conservancy, who has a long history of kind of conservation, and they have the right academics, they are knowledgeable in terms of marine spatial planning, which I'm not at all. So all these, and they have a science-based way to deal with that. So they are the experts and they know what they are doing. So for us, partnering with them is important. And for our investors as well, having someone credible and knowing that it's not just a label, that someone is really going on the ground and doing what needs to be done and in the right way is very important. So that part was very, very for our investor base is important. I would say is the usual. Investors are also kind of wary about risk return. Ultimately, we're in a financial market, so it's they want to do good, but they also want the returns. I think that we have these three kind of pillars that are taken into account: the impact, definitely, and making sure that it makes sense, but also the fact that it makes sense from a risk return point of view. And in this transaction, we had also PRI, so a credit enhancement on the product. So for the product itself, the blue bond actually was rated AA2 by Moody's, whereas Belize at the time was rated CAA3. So ultimately, for the investor having like that burden, knowing that actually they have a product that is insured by DFC, which has the full faith and credit of the US, is something that that helped investor get comfortable on the risk side and actually think, okay, like this is a perfect product from a risk return point of view, but also from an impact point of view. And I think that there is a lot of collaboration to be done, because I'm talking about credit enhancement from from a development from DFI, but ultimately there are other DFIs, but also credit enhancement can be done in other ways, where maybe someone, rather than giving grants, take the equity part of the debt. There are many ways to do this. It needs collaboration, but ultimately we're here for make sure that solutions are found. So that's what we're trying to achieve.
Yeah, thank you very much. I mean, clearly there's an interest from your clients, right? But there's also challenges, and one of these challenges that we've heard is the issue of credit rating, lack of credit rating in many developing countries, especially in SIDS. Okay, so I want to dwell on this a little bit more. Okay, so maybe about one question I have for you, since you're working on the private, side, private equity side more. How do you look at the question of credit rating, right? When it comes to investment in emerging economies, or not in EU27, right, which you are comfortable with, but outside EU27, right? How do you look at this question of credit rating?
Well, I mean, obviously most of our investments when they are on the private side, so obviously they will not have a public rating in most of the cases. And of course, for an institution as the EIB, the European Investment Bank, we get comfortable with the assessment of this project through a very thorough due diligence, effectively. It doesn't matter if it's in the EU27 or if we are talking outside EU. The process is pretty much consistent across all the bank, and the way we carry out our due diligence is not just a financial due diligence. So we're not just looking at the business plan or the financial projection of the company or the expectation of the project. Is really going into the details. So we have a technical team inside the bank. We have engineers, we have sector expertise and economists, where they really help us to go into the details. So we'll be looking at all the aspects, not only the financial aspects, we will also look at the technology aspects. And of course, we will also want to make sure that all of our projects meet our policy requirements. So that there is the environmental assessment is in line with our policies, as well as the social impact of our investments.
Thank you very much. Clearly, what you described is what's important for private equity, right? But I would maybe ask Marcus and Emmanuel, right? But for issuance of blue bonds, right? And you do need to have a credit rating, right? Sovereign credit rating. But many countries, they really don't have, sometimes a small country don't have a rating, but even when it has a rating, the rating is not very strong, right? But the UN, okay, UNDP, for example, have done a lot of work that we believe, help de-risk investment, right? Because on a particular sectoral issues, of let's say climate change, if you want to develop, for example, renewable economy, you have to undertake reforms in policy areas, and to create incentives, for attracting investment and so forth, right? But also there are governance challenges in many settings, right? And many countries, including developed countries, have to deal with questions of transparency and corruption, money laundering, and so forth, right? So, so we know that we're not a financial institution as UN, right? But we know that a lot of work we do, help create a safer investment environment, right? And it would help improve credit ratings. So, in your view, should the UN do this kind of work, or is there a possibility that we should maybe work together to help our countries to improve their credit standing? Right? I think you touched on this a little bit, but I want to hear a bit more.
Yeah, so I think that's a very good question. And to overcome such similar challenges, we are working with local DFIs also very closely together, because this helps us then to understand in our FIC activities the local necessities far better than if we just work with a cross-regional intermediaries. So this is I think very important, that we use more the set of capabilities which are local in the market where we finance projects. So this is one. How long you mentioned a very important part. This is de-risking. But de-risking just can be done with support of governments, very likely. So I know this from IUCN, very interesting, and I also think, and IUCN is a part of UN, so what IUCN can do, in my opinion, is really reviewing and approving nature-based solutions. This is one important part. It goes not in the direction of government rating, but it is already something which is a kind of due diligence process for projects, because we do not have the knowledge about nature-based solutions, but we know that we can't just transform the world with electrification, because we would need 500% of the commodities we're already using. This would be not sustainable. So we need nature-based solution to make the trick. And there, IUCN, body of UN, can help. And then maybe we need to have the discussion you just have alluded to. As you see, I'm hovering around. I have no answer whether UN should take a lead here, but at least UN should take a lead of a discussion here to target this discussion clearly into this direction. But maybe you have an answer.
I think that there are like many stakeholders here, and I think that ultimately on the credit rating, I think that it's more. I would think that DFIs still have a role to play there. I think where UNDP can help is definitely more on the I would say environmental or nature or social side, because like ultimately TNC, the Nature Conservancy is for example present in Belize. I'm sure they are present elsewhere, and we're working with them on other projects. But definitely it's about like UNDP can help on two sides. Like first of all, like definitely helping maybe understand what type of even target makes sense for that country in terms of improving their, I would say, I'm not only blue, but green or social. So first of all, understanding what should be their target, because we can't assess that. Like, I don't know what is a significant target for a country, for example, like Tunisia, even if I'm from there. That's one. Second one is, I agree, making sure like it's mainly being there and being present, so knowing what projects make sense, who are social, civil society that's there, that is active, that are trying to achieve things, and maybe partner to see what type of projects make sense, etc. And then ultimately there is also the relationship with the government. We have definitely covering, we issue debt, either brown or other through countries. So we talk to the head of central banks, we talk to the Minister of Finance, but ultimately when it comes to projects like this, there will be other like parts of the government that are involved, like environment or you name it, or like social, etc. There are many, like every time we worked on this type of transaction, you have other ministers which actually very different objectives that are involved. So having that relationship that makes, because like UNDP can work on these relationships, or maybe are already present. I know that you are already present in certain countries. So that would be very helpful, because it will help at least on the part that is having investor or private capital trusting the impact side is very important. And as you mentioned, there's a lot of question mark about governance or corruptions in these countries, unfortunately. And I think having something like, some UNDP being saying, oh, we're there, so we're making sure things are happening, is amazing. And same actually for impact reporting, because it's not only about putting the money there, but it's also afterwards making sure money are delivered to the right projects, granted to the right projects, and then delivering the impact that they are supposed to deliver. So all that work, which is, I would say, a lot of work, will kind of be very helpful.
So maybe I have one more round of question. Then maybe if there are questions from the audience, we can have some discussions. The question I have is really, we have seen the phenomenon growth of bond issuance, for example, right? But our developing countries, especially SIDS, still have not seen large amount of increase, of this kind of financing flows to their countries. So I have two specific questions very quickly. One is that what do you think is holding back, the large amount of financing flowing to these, SIDS, right? The economies in the SIDS. How can your institutions, what does it take for your institutions to invest more, right, in this, in the economies of these countries, right? So this is one. Then the other question, very quickly linked to this, is so what do you think, the UN, can do, right? How can UN help, right, to work with you, perhaps, to increase the financing flow, to these, developing countries? Maybe I go this order, about.
Yeah, from my side, I mean, I guess what is probably true to say is that obviously in these countries is often difficult to find the right project to invest in. And I think what we have seen and what the bank has been doing over the years is to intervene a bit upfront, and even before a project is potentially ready for financing, is to work with the local authorities to get them ready and mature enough for then being either invested or financed by the bank itself. So we have a number of projects related to advisory services, where we help the local government to shape, in a way, the projects, so that then they can become more credible and more financeable. So, for example, in the context of our Clean Ocean Initiative, we have a program dedicated to the Caribbean region, to really where we put some money and some budget to develop projects with the local authorities and prepare them for a potential financing under the Clean Ocean Initiative.
So I think one issue identified very clearly is in a way pipeline, right? So you need a strong project pipeline. So I think I maybe some comments a bit later. Thank you.
So just to comment about why SIDS aren't seeing like flow of money, and I'm going to just comment from a government debt point of view. It's mainly because of the risk ultimately. So some of the investors are fine to like when the government issue bonds to markets, they are like emerging market funds that would invest. It's very, very specific, and most of the people like don't feel comfortable to invest in these type of, because I think it's riskier than investing in a whatever US, for example, government debt, and so there is less investment because there is more risk. So the main point here is definitely, but the opportunity that SIDS have right now is is the blue economy and people interested in blue economy. So I think that it will open, it's opening the door to getting more interest from investors. But ultimately, again, like you need that element of which would bring interest from investor, but you also need the part where you're credit enhancing. You can't do, if you want more investment, that's needed actually, because you open the door to other investors who usually don't look at the SIDS debt because it's too risky. What UN is like, as I mentioned earlier, for me, the main role is what we can do is like mainly seeing what countries are interested in conservation commitment, because that's really important, and work from there. Like you can speak to us ultimately, so you have my business card now, but but you can speak to us and we can try to find other partners where we can all together bring a solution. And I think that's also, as mentioned by Marcus, I hope the reason that we have this conference as well. So it's mainly about finding so we are trying to build these relationships and making sure that all these parts to make the transaction happen or to make investor interested are here. So we can start on the conservation aspect, because for us is the first part, which that's where the story starts, because then we can get help from a DFI, etc. And I think that's the angle that SIDS have today, is starting with that angle and using it to get the credit enhancement and then get access to the capital market.
So I want to compare this with a current issue of the climate dialogue we have with our corporate clients. Because the taxonomy in Europe is imposing a dedicated disclosure requirement and structure requirement for climate mitigation and climate adaptation. And the bank can play a role of a positive agent of change in this context, because the bank has to ask the corporate, tell me your details. And if we now exchange the word corporate by SIDS or LDC, we know what we need. We need information. And we need, and I have seen this during the last quarters very often, that local authorities are shy to ask questions. The biggest failure is not asking the bank a question. Even a Ministry of Finance should be brave enough to ask us questions if they do not have really conviction in the trajectory of their project. So really have this transparent dialogue. This is so important. And thinking, unfortunately, fortunately, in a holistic way. In a holistic way that we need to know the social topics in the region. Child labor, diversity, gender equality. This is important also for financing ocean projects. And to disclose this is one of the first steps to being able to assess the underlying risk. Without being able to assessing the underlying risk, it will be very, very difficult. And this is, I think, a role the UN can play to make this transparent in a fair and not diminishing dialogue process, because then banks can start to understand what they can do. And lastly, I think it is also important that, and I have hinted it already, that we give a perspective to the countries. We have to link the economic performance to biological biodiversity progress. Just to use again the marine protected area example with the inverted U shape. So on the x-axis you have the protection, and on the y-axis you have the outcome. If you protect everything, no outcome. If you protect nothing, no outcome, because you destroy it. So the truth lays in the middle. But with such a concept, we can convince the local communities, the people, A, that they have to play a role, because we need their knowledge. Secondly, there is outcome for you, and the outcome is better than before. And we have a very great example, fortunately, unfortunately, in the developed part in New York. It's Shinnecock Bay. It's a hope spot. They have revamped via nature-based solution the complete bay that the local community can now live from harvesting clams again. And this is so breathtaking because this shows that we do not have to make a compromise on our occupation, on our employment, on our economic activity when we do this right. But this is just something what we can do in a way to reduce asymmetric information, sorry, I'm an economist, to then facilitate the money towards those projects. Last but not least, IUCN can provide us a list of projects they want to have financed. And they are already on it. And this is really great, but we need those.
Yeah, thank you very much. I think our time is almost up. But all what you have said really, provides many practical, steps, for us to collaborate. I think about you mentioned the question of pipeline, for example. We have actually a lot of work that can generate pipeline. We have hundreds of projects that are really successful, but our challenge is how can they be brought to scale, right? Because we have a lot of pilot projects with a sizable investment that are successful, but how can we, really attract, make them bankable? I think that's our challenge, right? But we have a basis, we have a lot of basis. We have, for example, climate investment platform on climate. We have ocean innovation challenges that are producing pipelines essentially. Okay, and we have now, yesterday, right? We had the Coral Global Fund for Coral Reefs, right, which is also producing pipelines. So we can do a lot together. I think in terms of information, I think the UN is really good at analysis. So we do a lot of socioeconomic analysis, right? We have very good general equilibrium calculations. The economists do, but we also have a lot of micro level analysis to look at the impact of the shocks, for example, on different segments of population, so that we can help direct the policy interventions, perhaps also investment actions. We can definitely do this. Under our SDG Impact project, we have not only produced the investment guide, standards, impact standards for equity, for bonds, for private enterprises. Right? We have developed these standards in consultation with the industry. We have also created so-called SDG investor maps. Right, in now 20 countries. We're going to go to 30 countries by end of this year. These are, so-called sectoral, essentially information linked, the SDG linked sectors. Okay, where you will see the size of the market. You will see enough analysis that will get the investors to a stage where they can, okay, I will decide now to perhaps invest in feasibility studies. So we have information in these sectors, SDG linked sectors, to a level that I think we believe is detailed enough for an investor, potential investor, to look at this seriously. And we have a number of examples where some intermediaries have started to invest in feasibility studies to create the pipeline for investors. So definitely, I think there's a lot of potential for collaboration. So we started a bit later. I don't know if there's one or two questions from the audience, then maybe we can close. Okay, so I think the ladies first, and then if you can introduce yourself briefly. Yeah.
Hello, I'm Hazel. I'm from Guatemala, and I come from a small NGO. We do ocean literacy, and we work a lot of youth and children empowerment in our coastal communities. And I work a lot to push them to keep studying and hopefully in the future study in the university and follow a career that focuses on ocean sustainability. And I'm a scientist, so I push a lot for them to be scientists, especially for the girls. But now after this panel, it was just really inspiring, and now I will push them to be economists as well. And well, I just wanted to ask you, like, what would you like to tell them? Like, I could share when I get back to Guatemala what would you tell them for the youth and the children from coastal communities from a country so underdeveloped like Guatemala? How can they be part of blue economy?
Simon Young from WTW. I actually wanted to add something quickly on the Belize deal, and I'd really emphasize to anybody in the room and spread the word that the details of the Belize deal are incredible. My actual question is, why haven't there been a number of successes? Because one of the points that I think is the most important is that S&P's credit rating of Belize's sovereign debt went up 3 notches after that deal closed. That for the bigger investment environment is incredibly important, because the sovereign rating in those countries is a cap on the rating of pretty much any other debt. So I think that's really important to emphasize, that if you can work on the sovereign side, then that really unlocks the playing field for the non-sovereign debt. But I'd also like to mention that we put in place a parametric hurricane wrapper for the debt repayments, in addition to the political risk insurance. And for a country like Belize, where climate risk is real and ever present and has a big impact on GDP when those events happen, that's an important additional element, because your PRI does not cover all of the risk. And pre-COVID, the big hits to Belize's GDP had all been because of hurricanes. So it's really important to take that into account as well.
Yeah, thank you very much. Just on the last point on insurance, definitely, because this is an important way to spread the risk, right? So that the cost of recovery is not borne only by those who are affected. So that you have we have in fact a big undertaking to develop the insurance market in many developing countries, working with IDF and so forth. So thank you very much. So I guess these are interesting and important comments. So let me say this. Okay, maybe let's end. Since the important question is asked by the lady from Guatemala. Maybe I end up with the last word. I'll give to you, Imene. But so maybe Alberto and Marcos and Imene, you can maybe answer these questions, quickly.
Yes, sure. Well, congratulations for what you're doing. I think is really impressive, and I guess you probably can be more inspiration to the young lady and young guys in Guatemala than me. But I mean, I think honestly, yeah, what you're doing is really amazing, and I mean, from my side, I think the inspiration really comes from showing what can be achieved. So really showing what a career in any area can do for them in terms of not only economic one, but also in terms of the impact that your career can have outside your personal achievement.
So 2 things from my side. First is stay curious. I think the most important driver for development was curiosity. If we do lose our curiosity, we never will change, because we will get stuck in complacency or even more difficult situations. So really create the desire for understanding, for changing. And then this counts, by the way, also for all of us. Stay curious. And then the second one is, which also counts for all of us, is asking us constantly the question, what should we have done in 2022 in Lisbon? Out of the perspective of 2030, out of the perspective of 2050. If we now try to build a trajectory from today to the next years, we already have incorporated a failure of today's knowledge, of today's activity. If we try to think out of the future about today, we ignore the bias to today. And this is something which is very important for keeping curiosity also ongoing, and secondly, being a little bit unbiased and having a wish where we want to have been. And this is something what I think we all should ask ourselves, especially the future generation, because responsibility is not reciprocal. We have a responsibility for the future and not the future for today.
I don't know how I can follow this, but ultimately, I just going to speak as a girl who grew also in the South. So I would say, amazing what you're doing, and ultimately, education is key for us. Is the way to kind of move forward. So what you're doing is amazing, and either being invested in ocean, in economy, or being a doctor, etc. Anything that kind of help you open your mind and see other things and feel responsible. And we're lucky to have a generation that feels more responsible for our planet than we did or our parents did. So very proud of you, and yeah, keep it up.
So thank you very much, really, all of you, for your really extreme, interesting discussions and contributions. I think because the time is short, so we cannot get into more details. We certainly have more questions than we started, but thank you very much. Okay, so I think in the interest of time, I think we just have to close. Okay, thank you, and thank you for the audience for participating. Okay, thank you.